One wrong step, 2 seconds of stumbling. 3 ounces of scorching espresso ruining a $5,000 bespoke Brioni suit. In the New York underworld, spilling coffee on Damien Costa was an absolute death sentence. But instead of a bullet or a pink slip, the city's most feared man offered her a ring. The marble floors of the Caldwell and Pierce building on Wall Street were notoriously slick when wet. It was a miserable Tuesday morning in November, the kind of day where the rain fell in sheets, turning the city into a gray, unforgiving concrete canyon. Carlera Windmere, a 24-year-old junior financial analyst, was already running on 3 hours of sleep and an unhealthy amount of anxiety. Carlera was invisible at the firm, and she preferred it that way. Invisibility meant safety. It meant she could collect her paycheck, quietly funnel the majority of it toward her younger brother's crippling gambling debts, and avoid the predatory gaze of the senior partners. But today, invisibility was a luxury she couldn't afford. Arthur Pierce, the firm's notoriously high-strung managing partner, had ordered her to do the morning coffee run for the executive board. It was a demeaning task for an analyst, but arguing with Arthur was career suicide. Balancing a cardboard tray carrying 6 overflowing cups of scalding artisanal coffee from the cafe down the street, Carlera pushed through the heavy revolving glass doors. Her damp trench coat clung to her shoulders. She was late. The board meeting was supposed to start in exactly 4 minutes. She kept her eyes trained on the elevator bank, mentally calculating the quickest route through the bustling lobby. She didn't notice the sudden, eerie silence that had descended over the usually chaotic space. She didn't notice the security guards standing rigidly at attention, or the way the receptionists had suddenly stopped typing. She only saw the closing doors of the executive elevator. Carlera broke into a desperate sprint, the slick leather of her cheap boots skidding against the wet marble. "Hold the door," she gasped, rushing forward. She rounded the corner of the security desk just as a wall of solid, unyielding muscles stepped directly into her path. The collision was violent. Carlera gasped as the cardboard tray crumpled against a broad chest. Lids popped, scalding dark roast, caramel macchiatos, and oat milk lattes exploded upward in an arc of liquid disaster. The coffee splashed violently against a pristine charcoal grey wool suit, soaking instantly into the expensive fabric, dripping down a crisp white dress shirt, and splattering across a silk tie. Carlera hit the floor hard, the wind knocked out of her, surrounded by crushed paper cups and a spreading puddle of brown liquid. A collective horrified gasp echoed through the lobby. It wasn't just a gasp of surprise, it was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. Carlera scrambled to her knees, her hands trembling violently. "I am so sorry," she stammered, her gaze fixed on the ruined Italian leather shoes of the man she had just assaulted with caffeine. "I slipped. I wasn't looking. I'll pay for the dry cleaning, I swear." "Dry cleaning won't fix this," a voice rumbled. It was a quiet voice, deep and resonant, lacking any of the explosive anger Carlera expected. But the absolute stillness of the tone sent a shard of ice straight down her spine. She slowly tilted her head up, past the ruined trousers, past the soaked, custom-tailored jacket, to a face that made her breath hitch. Damien Costa. Even at the bottom rung of the corporate ladder, Carlera knew exactly who he was. Officially, Damien Costa was the CEO of Costa Holdings, a venture capital firm that owned a controlling stake in Caldwell and Pierce. Unofficially, he was the heir to the Costa crime family, a brutal and ruthless syndicate that controlled the eastern seaboard's shipping ports, underground casinos, and union contracts. He was a man who operated in the shadows, destroying lives and dismantling empires before his morning meetings. He was 32, lethally handsome, with sharp aristocratic features, a hard jawline, and eyes the color of shattered flint. Right now, those flint eyes were staring down at her. Arthur Pierce came sprinting out of the elevator, his face drained of all color, looking like a man marching to his own execution. "Mr. Costa, God Almighty, I am so sorry. This girl is a temp, an intern. She's gone." "You," Arthur pointed a shaking, manicured finger at Kalira. "Pack your desk. You are fired. Get out of this building immediately." Kalira's heart plummeted into her stomach. Fired. She was fired. The $2,000 she owed the Irish bookies by Friday suddenly felt like a noose tightening around her neck. She looked up at Arthur, tears of panic finally pricking her eyes, and then looked back at Damien. She didn't cower. Despite the terror radiating through her veins, survival instinct flared. She met Damien's cold stare directly. "I'm not an intern," she said, her voice shaking but audible. "I'm a junior analyst, and it was an accident." Damien didn't blink. He slowly reached into the inner pocket of his ruined jacket and withdrew a pristine dark gray silk handkerchief. He dabbed at the coffee dripping from his lapel, his movements methodical and terrifyingly calm. "Arthur," Damien said softly, not breaking eye contact with Kalira. "Yes, Mr. Costa." "Security is on their way to escort her out," Arthur babbled, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Did I say she was fired?" Damien asked. The volume of his voice didn't rise, but the temperature in the lobby seemed to drop 10 degrees. Arthur choked on his words. I assumed. The disrespect." "You assumed wrong," Damien said. He looked down at Kalira, his expression completely unreadable. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating. The entire lobby waited for the axe to fall. Instead, Damien stepped around her, his ruined shoes making a slight squishing sound on the marble. He stopped next to Arthur. "Send her to my office on the top floor at exactly noon," Damien instructed. "If she isn't there, or if you attempt to fire her, I will personally see to it that you never work in this city again." Before Arthur could stammer out a reply, Damien walked into the waiting elevator. The door slid shut, leaving Kalira kneeling in a puddle of coffee, trembling and entirely unsure if she had just been saved or condemned to a fate far worse than unemployment. The hours between 8:30 and noon dragged by with agonizing slowness. Kalira sat at her cubicle, staring blankly at spreadsheets that made no sense. Her colleagues treated her like a walking ghost, giving her desk a wide berth. Everyone knew the rumors about the top floor. It was where Costa Holdings operated its private affairs. People who went up there rarely came back down the same. At 11:55 a.m., Kalira stood up, smoothed down her cheap, coffee-stained skirt, and walked to the private executive elevator. Her hands were sweating so much she could barely press the button for the penthouse level. When the doors opened, she didn't find an office. She found a fortress. The floor was dark, accented with mahogany and brushed steel. Two men in dark suits, whose bulges beneath their jackets clearly indicated firearms, gave her a thorough pat-down without speaking a word. "He's waiting," the larger of the two muttered, opening a set of heavy double oak doors. Kalira stepped into a cavernous office overlooking the Hudson River. The rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Damien Costa was sitting behind a massive desk carved from a single piece of dark wood. He had changed into a fresh, immaculate black suit. He didn't look up from the document he was reading. "Sit, Miss Winmere." Kalira swallowed hard and took a seat in the leather chair opposite him. She gripped the armrests to stop her hands from shaking. "Mr. Costa, if this is about the suit, I looked up the brand. I know it's a Brioni. I can't pay for it all at once, but if you let me keep my job, I can arrange your payment plan. $50 a week." Damien finally raised his head, cutting her off with a single, sharp look. He closed the folder on his desk and leaned back. "Do you know why you aren't currently packing your belongings into a cardboard box, Kalira?" he asked. "Because you want to punish me yourself?" she guessed, her voice barely a whisper. A ghost of a smirk played on his lips, gone as quickly as it appeared. Because when Arthur Pierce was screaming at you, and you were sitting in a puddle of garbage water, you didn't look at the floor. You looked at me. You have nerve. I need nerve right now. Kalira frowned, confusion momentarily overriding her fear. I don't understand. Damien stood up, walking slowly around the desk. He leaned against the edge of it, towering over her. Let's talk about your brother Thomas. Kalira's heart stopped. The blood rushed from her face. Leave Tommy out of this. He has nothing to do with my clumsiness. Thomas owes $85,000 to Declan O'Connor, Damien stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. Declan is a brute who runs a mid-level Irish loan-sharking operation out of Hell's Kitchen. Thomas missed his payment last Thursday. Declan's men are planning to visit your brother's apartment in Queens tonight. They are bringing a claw hammer. Kalira shot up from her chair, panic seizing her throat. No. I have a payment for them. I was going to drop it off. $2,000 won't stop them, Kalira. They want to make an example of him. Damien crossed his arms. I bought his debt an hour ago. Kalira froze. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. You bought it. Declan works in my territory. He was happy to hand over the paper when I asked, Damien said smoothly. Your brother is currently safe. No one is going to break his legs or yours. The debt is erased. Kalira backed away slowly, her mind racing. Men like Damien Costa did not do favors. They did not erase debts. They bought souls. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice trembling. I don't have $85,000. I don't have anything. I don't want your money, Damien said, pushing off the desk and taking a slow step toward her. I am currently in the final stages of taking over my father's seat on the commission. The old guard, the Dons who control the remaining syndicates, are traditionalists. They do not trust a man who isn't grounded. They believe an unmarried man is reckless, a flight risk, prone to instability. My uncle is trying to use my bachelor status to prove I am unfit to lead, hoping to launch a coup. Kalira stared at him, trying to process the casual way he was discussing a mafia power struggle. And, Damien continued, his eyes darkening, my family is currently plagued by a rat. Someone in my inner circle is leaking information to the feds. If I bring in a woman from our world, a mob daughter, an arranged marriage, she brings her family's spies with her. I cannot trust anyone in my circle. He stopped just inches from her, his sheer physical presence overwhelming. Kalira had to tilt her head all the way back to meet his gaze. I need a civilian, Damien said softly. Someone with no ties to the life. Someone completely clean with a background that can withstand federal scrutiny and family paranoia. Someone desperate enough to play the part convincingly and smart enough to keep her mouth shut. Kalira stopped breathing. No. I want you to move into my estate in the Hamptons this weekend, Damien commanded, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. You will wear my ring. You will attend family dinners, galas, and sit by my side while I secure my empire. You will be the perfect devoted fiancé. You will smile for my enemies, and you will never, ever ask questions about my business. You're insane, Kalira breathed, shaking her head. You want me to fake an engagement to a mob boss? I'll be killed. You will be the safest woman in North America, Damien countered. No one touches what belongs to me. I don't belong to you. Damien's eyes flashed with a sudden, dangerous heat. He reached out his large hand, gently but firmly gripping her chin, holding her head still. His thumb brushed against her jawline. The touch was burning hot. $85,000 says otherwise, Kalira, he whispered, his face dangerously close to hers. You ruined my suit, but you are going to save my empire. The contract lasts for 6 months. At the end of it, the debt is permanently forgiven, and I will wire $1 million into an offshore account in your name. You can take Thomas and start over anywhere in the world." Calera was trapped in his gaze. $1 million. Absolute freedom, safety for her brother. All she had to do was survive 6 months in the belly of the beast, pretending to be in love with a monster, and if I say no, she managed to ask. Damien released her chin and took a step back, the cold mask slipping perfectly back into place. "Then I sell the paper back to Declan O'Connor, and I let nature take its course." Calera closed her eyes. She thought of Tommy's terrified face. She thought of the claw hammer. She opened her eyes and looked at the devil standing in front of her. "When do I move in?" she asked. A terrifyingly predatory smile curved Damien Costa's lips. "Pack your bags, my love. A car will be waiting downstairs at 5. The Southampton estate on Meadow Lane was less a home and more a fortress disguised as architectural perfection. Wrought iron gates swung open to reveal a sprawling gravel driveway, flanked by immaculately manicured hedges and a fleet of black SUVs. For Calera, stepping out of the car was like stepping onto another planet. Gone were the subway fumes and the cramped Queen's apartment she shared with Thomas. In their place was the sharp, salty air of the Atlantic and a chilling sense of isolation. A new wardrobe, curated by a silent Italian stylist, filled a walk-in closet larger than her entire previous apartment. Silks, cashmeres, and a staggering array of designer labels replaced her sensible clearance rack suits. But the heaviest item she wore was the ring, a flawless 5-carat Asher-cut diamond set in platinum. It felt like a handcuff. For the first 3 weeks, Calera barely saw Damien. He was a phantom haunting his own house, locked in his mahogany-paneled study, or taking hushed, tense calls on the terrace at 3 a.m. When they did interact, it was strictly business. He drilled her on his family tree, his preferred brands, and the fabricated story of their whirlwind romance in a private VIP lounge at the Baccarat Hotel. The real test came on week 4. "Tonight you meet my uncle," Damien said, leaning against the doorframe of her bedroom while she sat at the vanity. He looked lethal in a midnight blue tuxedo. "Lorenzo is an old-world Shah. He smells blood in the water. If he suspects for a second that you are a hired prop, he won't just kill my bid for the commission. He will have you disappeared." Calera's hand trembled slightly as she applied her lipstick. She met his flint-gray eyes in the mirror. "I won't break." "See that you don't," he murmured, crossing the room. He stopped behind her, his large hand settling on her bare shoulders. A jolt of electricity shot down her spine. His touch was warm, heavy, and startlingly grounding. "Tonight you are mine, completely and utterly." The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Pier in Manhattan. It was a suffocating display of wealth and barely concealed malice. The room was packed with politicians, judges, and men in expensive suits with dead eyes. Calera played her part flawlessly. She smiled, she laughed at the right moments, and she kept her hand firmly tucked into Damien's arm. She felt the heavy, scrutinizing gazes of the New York underworld, tracking her every move, but she anchored herself to the solid warmth of the man beside her. Midway through the evening, Damien was pulled into a hushed conversation with 2 union bosses. Calera slipped away toward the champagne tower, desperate for a moment to breathe. "A lovely stone," a raspy voice purred from the shadows of a marble pillar. Calera turned to see Lorenzo Costa. He was a man in his late 60s, with a face carved from granite and a smile that didn't reach his cold, reptilian eyes. Beside him stood his top lieutenant, a slick, sharp-eyed man named Matteo. "Thank you," Calera said smoothly, forcing her heart rate to slow. "Damien has wonderful taste. He does. Though usually he prefers women with pedigree," Lorenzo sneered, taking a sip of his scotch. You're a junior analyst from Queens, aren't you, my dear? And nobody... It makes me wonder what my nephew is really playing at. He's playing at building a future, Lorenzo, Calera countered, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her veins. Something the old guard seems to struggle with. Lorenzo's eyes flashed with venom. He took a step closer, crowding her space. Careful, little girl. You are swimming in very deep, very dark waters. People drown out here every day. Before Lorenzo could say another word, a heavy hand clamped down on his shoulder. Damien had appeared out of nowhere, his presence suddenly dominating the space. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. Is there a problem, Uncle? Damien asked softly. Lorenzo forced a tight smile. Just getting to know the future Mrs. Costa. Oh, she's not for you to know, Damien said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. He pulled Calera flush against his side, his arm wrapping protectively around her waist. Walk away, Lorenzo. The uncle's jaw tightened, but he gave a curt nod and slipped back into the crowd with Matteo. Calera let out a shaky breath, leaning into Damien. He knows, she whispered. He suspects, Damien corrected, his grip on her tightening. But suspicion isn't proof. The real twist, however, didn't come from Lorenzo. It came 3 days later, in the quiet solitude of Damien's Southampton study. Calera had snuck in looking for a book, only to find a leather-bound ledger left carelessly open on the desk. Her Wall Street training kicked in. She shouldn't have looked, but the columns of numbers drew her in. It was a log of offshore wire transfers. The routing numbers were heavily disguised, but Calera spent her days tracking financial anomalies for Caldwell and Pierce. She recognized a glaring pattern. Millions of dollars weren't just being laundered. They were being systematically siphoned out of the Costa Holdings' main accounts and funneled into a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands. But what made her blood freeze was the authorization signature code. It wasn't Damien's. It wasn't Lorenzo's. It belonged to Matteo, Lorenzo's lieutenant. But the Shell Corporation's ultimate beneficiary was listed under a dummy name Calera recognized from an internal memo at her firm. It was a name associated with the Southern District of New York's Federal Task Force. Matteo wasn't just stealing. He was the rat. He was buying immunity with Damien's money. Calera's heart hammered against her ribs as she stood in the center of the study, the ledger trembling in her hands. If she took this information to Damien, she crossed the line from a paid civilian to an active participant in a mafia war. But if she said nothing, the man who had protected her, the man whose touches were lingering in her mind far longer than they should, would be destroyed. The study door clicked open. Damien stepped in, freezing when he saw her holding the book. His expression instantly darkened into a mask of pure, lethal fury. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice dangerously low. Calera didn't flinch. She slammed the ledger shut and walked straight up to him. "You're bleeding money, Damien, and you're bleeding information to the SDNY." Damien's eyes narrowed. "You have exactly 5 seconds to explain why you are looking at private family documents before I forget that you are under my protection." "Matteo," Calera said, her voice unwavering, "he's the rat. He's siphoning funds using dummy accounts disguised as maritime shipping invoices. I tracked these exact routing shell patterns at my firm. He's feeding your financial structure directly to the feds to build a RICO case against you, leaving Lorenzo perfectly positioned to take over the family when you're arrested." Damien stared at her, the silence in the room stretching until it was deafening. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse her of lying. His brilliant, ruthless mind processed the data she had just handed him, clicking the pieces into place. "Are you absolutely certain?" he asked quietly. "I'd stake my life on it," Calera replied. "You just did." Damien reached out, his hand sliding to the back of her neck, pulling her close. His forehead rested against hers. You should have stayed out of this, Kalira. You should have kept your head down. I told you on day one, she whispered, her breath mingling with his. I don't look at the floor. The retaliation was swift, silent, and absolute. 2 nights later, Lorenzo and Matteo were summoned to a peace meeting at a private warehouse in Red Hook. Kalira was kept under heavy guard at the estate, pacing the floors until dawn. When Damien finally returned, his suit was immaculate, but there was a dark, hollow exhaustion in his eyes. He poured a glass of whiskey and looked at her. It's done, he said simply. Lorenzo has been permanently retired. Matteo is no longer a concern. The commission has officially recognized me as the head of the family. Kalira exhaled a breath she felt like she had been holding for months. So, you won. We won, Damien corrected. The months blurred together after that. The fake engagement shifted into something unspoken and terrifyingly real. The lingering glances, the brush of hands, the way Damien's cold exterior shattered only when they were alone behind closed doors. Kalira stopped counting down the days on her calendar. She stopped thinking about the $1 million. On the exact day their 6-month contract expired, Kalira walked into the kitchen to find a sleek black briefcase sitting on the island. Beside it was a printed receipt of a wire transfer. $1 million deposited into a secure offshore account in her name. Thomas's debts were cleared. Her end of the bargain was fulfilled. Damien stood by the window looking out at the crashing waves. He didn't turn around. A car is waiting outside, Damien said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth he had shown her over the last few weeks. Your old life is waiting, Kalira. You are free. No one will ever look for you. You have a clean slate. Kalira stared at the briefcase. It was everything she had fought for. Safety, independence, survival. Slowly she walked toward the island. She picked up the wire transfer receipt. She looked at the string of zeros. Then, with deliberate calmness, she ripped the paper in half. Damien turned at the sound of the tearing paper, his eyes wide with a flash of genuine shock. Kalira walked across the room, closing the distance between them. I don't want a clean slate, she said, looking up into his flint-grey eyes. I don't want the money, and I don't want to leave. Damien's chest heaved. He looked down at her, his hands clenching into fists at his sides, as if fighting the urge to touch her. Kalira, you don't know what you're asking for. This life is blood and shadows. I am a monster. You're my monster, she whispered, stepping into his space and resting her hands flat against his chest, feeling the heavy, frantic beat of his heart. You spilled coffee on my life, Damien. I'm not letting you clean it up and walk away. A rough, desperate sound tore from Damien's throat. His restraint shattered. He hauled her against him, his mouth crashing down on hers with a bruising, consuming passion that tasted of whiskey, danger, and a terrifying forever. Kalira kissed him back, anchoring her hands in his hair, fully embracing the dark, gilded cage she had chosen. The contract was over, but the real sentence was a lifetime, and she wouldn't have it any other way. If you couldn't tear your eyes away from this twist-filled mafia romance, you know exactly what to do. Hit that like button. Share this story with your fellow dark romance addicts, and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, pulse-pounding audio stories every single week. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss a new upload. See you in the next one.